So, brethren, it's a pleasure being here once again. And today I would like to speak on snare number 12, which says, if you love me, keep my commandments. By Siri. Okay. And that is taken from John chapter 14, verse 15. Now, today's segment are spending time reading the Holy Word. Right? So I'll start now. The text, if you love me, keep my commandments in John 14, verse 15, is often used by our friends, the Adventists, as a bait to entice true Christians to forsake the liberty which the grace of God allows, and be saddled instead with the yoke of the law. A yoke which the Apostle Peter in Acts chapter 15 says, neither they nor their forefathers were able to bear. So that's Acts 15, verses 1 to 29. But I would like you to read that on your own time, brethren. And what I would like you to do is to focus especially on verses 1 to 5, then verses 7 to 10, verses 13 to 20, then verses 22 to 29. As a consequence, St. Peter chose the grace of God instead. As is expected, the bait is set in the following verbal format. Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. That's John 14, verse 15. And the listener is then asked politely this question: do you really love Jesus? That is my question I'm asking to you, the listeners. Do you really love Jesus? Do you really love Jesus? This said, the activist will then say, if indeed you really love Jesus, you must keep his commandments, for Jesus himself said that that is the proof of your love for him. And the question is, it sounds good. It sounds good. And it surely does. And many are the unsuspecting souls who have been ensnared by the recruitment scheme of the Adventists. And the sad thing about this affair is that many Christians, for lack of proper teaching, have left good Christian assemblies and have joined these Sabbath-keeping Christian cults. However, all is not lost, for God is able to wrench them out of the tentacles of these pseudo-Christian religions, even now. Brethren and online listeners, in order to understand what Jesus meant by, if you love me, keep my commandments, one only has to read verses 21 and 23 of the said John chapter 14 and see that Jesus' commandments of John 14:21 is replaced by my words. And that can be seen by the following John 14, by the following. If you love me, keep my commandments. That is in John 14, verse 15. Now compare John 14, verse 15 text with John 14, verse 23. And John 14, verse 23 says, if a man love me, he will keep my words. Notice, if you will, that my commandments of John 14, verse 15 or 14, verse 21 is replaced by my words in John 14, verse 23. And the question I'm going to ask you, brethren, is this. Is this surely significant? Is this surely significant? Isn't it? So from the information, therefore, that we have just seen in the scriptures, we know that Jesus Christ, the head of the church, is not speaking about the 10 commandments in those quoted verses, but about some particular saying of his. If that be so, one would expect that I would be able to justify my position from the scriptures. Undoubtedly, that is what I intend to do next. Now, whenever Jesus wanted to differentiate between his commandments and that of his Father's commandments, he invariably did so by calling the 10 commandments the law or the commandment of God, as can be clearly seen by the following excerpts. John 7, verse 19, which says, "Did not Moses give you the law, and none of you keep it, the law? Why go ye about to kill me?" That's John 7, verse 19. Now, the question I'm asking you, brethren, is this. What law is Jesus saying Moses gave? What law is Jesus saying Moses gave? I repeat, what law is Jesus saying Moses gave? And the answer is hinted at in the said verse by Jesus' second question. And the question is, why go ye about to kill me? That is in John 7, verse 19. The law that Jesus is saying that Moses gave is surely the 10 commandments. Now, if you are not yet convinced that my last sentence is true, please consider the following. In Mark chapter 7, verse 10, it says, "For Moses said, honor thy father and thy mother, and whoso curses father or mother, let him die the death." That's Mark 7, verse 10. Now, the question I'm going to ask is this. Is it not clear that Jesus is referring to the 10 commandments in those quoted texts? Of course, it is, my dear brethren. So from those references, therefore, we can see that when Jesus referred to his commandments in John 14, verse 15, he meant those commandments which he himself gave, as distinct from those which his father gave to the children of Israel at Sinai. Accordingly, my commandments, those are the words, my commandments of John chapter 14, verse 15, refers in part to the new commandments which Jesus himself gave in John 13, verse 14, which is, "A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another." That's John 13, verse 34. Now, some will say, what's the difference between love thy neighbor as thyself and love one another as I have loved you? Well, the question I am asking you, brethren, do you think that Christ is less prudent than any mortal and does not know the meaning of the word new? I repeat, do you think that Christ is less erudite, than any mortal and does not know the meaning of the word new? Well, should that be your state, the difference I now gladly state with haste. In the commandments, love thy neighbor as thyself, the base from which that love is to be measured is you, that is yourself. However, in Jesus' new commandment, The base is no longer you or yourself, but Christ. This change has been made for good reasons. Namely, if a vagrant loves you as he loves himself, you know what your meals would be and where you would sleep if he were to invite you to spend a day with him. Because of the weakness in oneself, Jesus has moved the benchmark of love from oneself to Christ himself. Because of this fact, Jesus' commandment of John 13:34 is really a new commandment indeed. With this, you should agree. Now, I know that the more erudite of the SDA scholars will say that so far I have only dealt with one commandment, while in John 14:15 speaks of commandments. That is in fact so. Therefore, I need to provide you with a text that has commandments. If that is your request, here is the answer, my brethren. So I'm reading First John chapter 3, verses 22 to 23, which says, whatsoever we ask, we receive of him because we keep his commandments. And this is his commandments, that we should believe on the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another as he gave us commandment. That's First John 3, verses 22 to 23. There's your answer. Excuse. Therefore, as I come to an end of tonight's segment, brethren, to put in John 14:15 in its New Testament perspective, therefore, we would have the following. If you love me, keep my commandments, which are to believe on the name of God's Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another as Christ has loved you. That, brethren, and online listeners, is the God-approved meaning of John 14, verse 15. That being the case, the SDA's interpretation is heretical, to say the least, and must be rejected accordingly. So as I close, brethren, now with respect to the Christian conduct of the believer today, the instructions in righteousness to which all true Christians should adhere are to be found in Jesus' teachings in the Gospels, the doctrines of his first century apostles, prophets, and elders, as catalogued in the epistles, and those relevant instructions which are contained in Revelation. So, I would like you to do, brethren, is read Acts chapter 15, verses 19 to 29, then you go to Acts chapter 16, verses 4 to 5, Ephesians chapter 2, verses 19 to 20, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 1 to 2, 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 to 2, and understand that my interpretation is doctrinally sound. So, brethren, that's the end of my segment today. I will be live next week again. Remember that Jesus Christ is returning, and he will be returning soon. And we are obligated to prepare ourselves for his return. So, have a safe, productive week. And brethren, I would like you to, when you're doing your devotions, to please lift somebody up in prayer. And don't forget to cover yourself, to cover everything that concerns you, your family. If you are a business person, you cover your business. You cover your place of employment if you are employed. And if you are a family person, then you cover your children and your family first before actually praying for anyone. And then also, too, brethren, you have to ensure that you don't suffer any spiritual backlash or kickback. So you also too have to bind, right? Any spiritual kickback and backlash. So, brethren, have a safe and productive week. Remember that Jesus Christ loves you and I love you. So bye for now.